Welcome to Hebrew Insights. This channel is dedicated to revealing what has been lost in translation, providing biblical insights to help solidify your foundation, connecting the Christian faith to its Hebrew roots, and restoring the new to the old. Join me on a journey through the scriptures from a Hebrew perspective.
Today's topic, the accursed thing. Like the story of the man and the woman, Genesis 3:1 onwards is given in detail. It describes item by item and gives the full particulars of. It is in focus, a state in which things are seen clearly and sharply, a state or condition in which something can be clearly understood. It is the story of our adversary and his modus operandi. A modus operandi is a particular way or method of doing something, especially one that is characteristic or well established. He tempts the human being to disobey Yahovah's command while they await his return. The human must choose to remain obedient and blessed, or choose to be disobedient and cursed. This is our test. Before we dive into the story, beginning in Genesis 3:1, we need context. So I would like to review some information that we've gone over to bring it into perspective. In episode 1, we were shown flashbacks, and this was regarding past events in a character's life in order for us to learn more about that character. That character was Hillel. In that episode, we saw when he was made perfect with beauty and wisdom. He was initially operating within the boundaries of God, and Yahovah gave him everything he had. He walked in God's presence. He was without blemish, meaning he was obedient, until he chose disobedience and was found lawless. He abundantly trafficked slander to instigate violence and was cast out to an empty space outside the mountain of God. He is fallen and has become the son of darkness. He was cut down by Yahovah and submitted to nations to come, all because he wanted to be like God. He wanted prestige, but was brought low. And in doing what he did, he made himself the enemy of Yahovah. In episode 2, we saw that he embodied chaos and lawlessness. He attempted to stop God from coming in to create in the space that he wanted to create in, because he felt as if this space was now his home. Yahovah came in to take away what he thought was his and to show him that it wasn't his. He stood opposed to him. But we see that he was no match for Yahovah, and what he was going to do, he did. And in this, his home was taken away. In episode 6, we saw that the serpent was introduced, and that the serpent would be the enemy of the living, those that the waters brought forth. And they were told to escape into the covering. We see here in episode 7 that when Yahovah made the man in his image as a depiction of himself, as an everlasting memorial to remind them, not just them, but also this being, Hillel, that is now there of their God and of his God. This is what the human represents to this being. The human made in the depiction and the image and the shadow of God is an everlasting reminder to him that he is defeated, that he does have a master and will, one way or another, submit to him. But this is what he sees when he sees the human being. The serpent, being Yahovah's enemy, has now become our enemy from the moment that we were made in his image. And so Elohim then gives the earth to the humans. So what was the home of this being has now been given to the human being who was created in the image of God. And not only that, but they were told to fill it and to conquer it, and that they were to exert control over all things. All things included this being. It included Halel. We then see that Yahovah placed them within his boundaries and also told them what they could and could not eat. By the end of the day, everything was fulfilling the purpose for which it existed. Everything was good. Everything was obedient. Yahovah gave the man and woman instructions to live by, and then he left to see what they would choose, to remain faithful to him by doing what he said to do, or to become unfaithful by doing the very thing he explicitly said not to do. Think of a parent that raises their child by instilling their values within them to live by and sends them out into the world. Will the child live according to the instructions of their parents or disregard them when enticed by another to do so? With that, we read Genesis 3:1. Now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which Yahovah God had made. And he said to the woman, Has God indeed said, You shall not eat of every tree of the garden? The first word we're going to look at is translated in the English as serpent. It is nachash in the Hebrew, and it is a poisonous snake that creeps and bites. Only death comes forth from its mouth. It is a traitor, a betrayer, a cheat, and a swindler. A swindler is a person who uses deception, also known as trickery, to deprive someone of their possessions. And a trick is a large-scale, systematic plan for attaining a particular object or putting a particular idea into effect. It is to make plans using underhanded tactics to achieve goals. It is intended to deceive or defeat someone by greater ingenuity. It is intended to create an illusion, which is a thing that is wrongly perceived or interpreted by the senses. It is a false idea or belief. It is also an enchanter, one who uses magic or sorcery, especially to put someone or something under a spell. And it is one who practices divination, and that is the practice of seeking knowledge of the unknown by a spiritual being. The next word we're looking at is translated in the English as cunning. It is aram in the Hebrew, and we've seen this word before. It means to be prudent, acting with thought for the future, to be perceptive, seeing what others cannot, intelligence, acquiring and applying knowledge and skills, to be shrewd, having sharp powers of judgment, and to be astute, which is having an ability to accurately assess situations or people and turn this to one's advantage. The next words we're going to look at is translated in the English as beast of the field. It is chayat hasadeh in the Hebrew, and it is a wild, untamed, unsubmitted animal. The next word we're going to look at is translated in the English as indeed, and this is af in the Hebrew, and this means anger, a strong feeling of annoyance, displeasure, or hostility. It is to fill someone with anger or provoke anger in someone. When we retranslate this verse with the Hebrew understanding, what we read is, the swindling, poisonous snake was resourceful from all wild animals which Yahovah Elohim made. he said to the woman angrily, "That God said, 'Don't you consume from any trees in the garden?'" Let's stop and look at what it is that we're seeing here. We're seeing the antagonist of the story. And the antagonist is a person who actively opposes or is hostile to someone or something. This is the adversary. And we're seeing that this is the same sea serpent from Genesis 1:21, as we spoke of earlier, who has now made his way onto the land. The serpent was there the entire time and was eavesdropping. He heard and saw everything. What Yahovah told the humans, this includes the man's birthright, which was the authority to subdue the land and control the animals. It included the man's response to his partner, the infatuation, and the fact that he said that his partner was his reason for being. And it also included the command that he gave regarding the trees on the perimeter of the garden and the tree in the middle of the garden. He didn't make himself known to the humans because he was collecting information in order to form a strategy. What is the serpent's objective? The serpent's objective is to legally possess control over the earth. He wants to take the earth from the human being because the earth, in his eyes, was previously his. Before Yahovah came and took it from him and created something beautiful and handed it to the human being, it was his. And so we now see that this is what he is looking to attain. And how will he attain this? Through the woman. Why did he choose to speak to the woman? Why not the man? He chose to speak to the woman because he knows that if he can entice the woman to disobey God, the man will follow suit. He heard the man say that the woman was his reason for living. This was his weakness. The serpent understood the woman being his weakness, and he knows that the man will follow her into disobedience. And if the man follows her into disobedience, he will be stripped of his inheritance and his authority, and it will also kill them in the process. 2 birds, 1 stone. When death permeates the entire earth, he will rule and reign over all things as he is death. He is using the same tactics witnessed in episode 1, inciting anger in others in order to turn their heart away from God. He knows that as long as the human race is in violation of the laws of their creator, they no longer have claim to the inheritance, as it is attached to the observance of the boundaries. How does he know this? Because this happened to him. He no longer had the privileges that he once had, and he was cast out of heaven. With that information, he is going to deceive his way into ownership. Whoever's voice you obey is who you worship. So we see that by its behavior that the serpent is lawless. As the verse stated, he was more resourceful from all the wild animals because he had no boundaries. He no longer operates within the laws of God, and therefore he has an arsenal of weapons to choose from. In Genesis 3:2, we read, "The woman said to the swindler, 'From the reproduction of the counsel of obedience of the garden, we can consume.'" In this verse, we see that she knew the boundaries set by her creator, and her only job, as Yahovah stated, was to aid the man in serving him by remaining within the boundaries, no matter what. So we see from this verse, the serpent manipulates Yahovah's words in order to achieve his goals of removing the human from his protection. His protection comes when you're within the boundaries. When you step outside of the boundaries, you are no longer protected. Think of an umbrella. When you're under the boundaries of an umbrella, you are protected from the rain. But if you step out from underneath the boundaries, you are no longer protected from the rain, and the rain has access to you. When you're within the boundaries, you're underneath the covering, but when you step out of the boundaries, you remove yourself from underneath the covering to having no covering. So this is what the enemy, what the serpent is here to do. It's important for us to see this because to know our enemy is half the battle. The best defense is a good offense. In Genesis 3:3, we read in the English, "But of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die." The word we're looking at in this verse is translated in the English as touch. It is naga in the Hebrew, and it means to lay hands on, to take hold of, and to approach. It is to be touched by a plague, which is an epidemic disease causing high mortality rate. It is also a mark, which is a spot on a person's body by which they may be identified or recognized. It is to make a visible impression or stain. It is to become stained or blemished. And stain has two definitions. The first one is a dirty mark that is not easily removed. And we see that it took Yeshua coming and dying in order for this stain to be removed. The second definition is a thing that damages or brings disgrace to someone's character, and someone's character is their image. This is stating that this damages our image as we are made in the image of God. This is why in Romans we're told that we must be transformed by the renewing of our mind in order to become Christ-like. Christ-like is the image of God. So we are journeying back to where we started. When we retranslate this verse with the Hebrew understanding, what we see is from the reproduction of the counsel of disobedience, which is front and center within your environment, Elohim said, don't you consume from it. Don't you take hold of it in order to avoid the plague of death. So we're seeing to reproduce disobedience is a plague. And we saw that because in episode 1, when Yehovah cast Halel out of heaven, we talked about how he sees sin, disobedience, lawlessness. They all mean the same thing. The transgression of the law, he sees it as a disease. So this is very telling, this verse here, because it's telling us exactly what it is to be blemished, what it is to be marked, what it is to be unclean. We see these terms all over our Bibles, and we see the meaning of it right from the beginning. And it means to transgress the law, to step outside of the boundaries that have been set by God. What we see in this verse is that the tree in the garden is cursed, and anything that is cursed, you must not take hold of. If you take hold of a thing that is cursed, the curse will take hold of you. And that curse is the plague, and the plague is death. That's what we are seeing in this verse. And he's warning the humans not to take hold of it. And we see examples of this again throughout our Bible, where Yehovah will tell someone, don't touch a particular thing. And when we're talking about taking hold of something, it isn't necessarily with your hands, right? Because how we consume is through our eyes and our ears. So you can take hold of a teaching without physically touching it. You can take hold of a belief, a set of ideas without physically touching it. Once you embrace a thing, you reach out to possess that thing has now taken hold of you. Whether good or bad, whatever it is that you reach out to attain, that thing also takes hold of you. So it's very important what we see here from the very beginning. Out of love, he tells them right away to stay away from this tree. Why? The fruit from this tree only reproduces disobedience. And Halal, the serpent, is disobedience. He is the father of sin. He is the father of all things that are evil. That's what the Bible calls sin. So when we understand this, this is telling us that this tree is his teachings. This is where the Bible talks about the doctrine of demons. It talks about the doctrine of the devil. It's because whenever you have a teaching that goes against what God has said, this is what it's referring to. So throughout the Bible, when you read those statements, it's bringing it back to the very beginning. This is where it began, with the counsel of disobedience in the center of the garden, and them being told not to take part of it. In Genesis 3:4, we read, "The deceiver said to the woman, 'There is no plague of death. You won't die.'" So again, we see him here doing what he does best, which is lying and twisting and manipulating the words of Yehovah in order to get his way. And his way, what he wants, is for human beings to disobey their creator, to step outside of the boundaries. He wants you to remove yourself from underneath the protection, the covering of your creator, in order that he may have access to you. And in order for him to have access to you, you must remove yourself. He cannot physically remove you from underneath the covering. So he lies and he deceives in order to get you to remove yourself from the covering. And we've seen this many times over in the Bible, and you'll see this in the connections at the end. But this is what he does because he is bound. He isn't like God, where he can do anything he wants, anytime that he wants. He has limitations. Even though he doesn't operate within the boundaries of his creator, he's still limited. He's unable to reach anyone underneath God's covering. If you're within his instructions, his commands, you cannot be touched by the devil unless God allows him to touch you. Now, this is what we saw in the book of Job. Satan had to approach God in order to get permission to touch Job, because Job, it tells us, was a righteous man. And to be righteous means that you are in right standing. And to be in right standing means that you are obedient. You follow and adhere to the boundaries that have been set before you by God. So in that story, we witness that he had to approach God, and God had to give him permission in order to touch Job. We also see in other parts of the scriptures examples. He entices people to remove themselves from underneath the covering of God by getting them to disobey the commands that God has given. Anytime you disobey the commands of God, you remove yourself from underneath his covering. And if you're not underneath his covering, you are not underneath his protection. His sole purpose is to get you to disobey. This is why Yeshua told us, if somebody slaps you on the cheek, turn the other. Somebody who doesn't operate within the boundaries of God, who is lawless, has an arsenal of weapons to choose from because they have no boundaries. What they're doing, whether they recognize it or not, is they're using their disobedience to get you to respond in disobedience. This is why the Bible tells us, do not repay evil with evil. It's because this is what the serpent wants. He will do anything to get you to step out of line. Under no circumstances should we step out of
obedience into disobedience. It is never a good thing. It is never allowed. And this is because disobedience is the entrance into your life that the enemy is looking for, because he is able to enter into your life once you remove yourself from the covering. This is why it said, if you grab hold of it, it will grab hold of you, because he legally has the authority to touch you if you touch his stuff. And his stuff is anything to do with disobedience, and disobedience is sin. He owns it because he is sin. In Genesis 3:5, we read in the English, "For God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." The first word we're going to look at is translated in the English as eyes. It is ayin in the Hebrew, and it means sight, discernment, understanding, and knowledge. The next word we're going to look at is translated in the English as open. It is pakach in the Hebrew, and it means to be wide open to its full extent, having virtually no limits or restrictions, to be unrestrained, exposed to attack, to be vulnerable, to be foolish, to be lawless, to be disobedient, to be open to persuasion and seduction. The next words we're going to look at is translated in the English as be like God. This is Kelohim in the Hebrew, and it means like power, might, strength, and leader. When we retranslate this verse with the Hebrew understanding, what we see is, it's because God knows that in the day you consume from it, your knowledge will be unrestrained, and you will be powerful, mighty, and strong, knowing good and evil. You will no longer require a leader. We're witnessing the same event that took place in heaven, the trafficking of slander, which led to violence. That the serpent is telling them that God is withholding something from them, and he is. The knowledge of evil. What the serpent is doing is lying about the reason why God is withholding it. He's saying that the reason why God is withholding it is because of jealousy, meaning that he doesn't want you to have this information. He doesn't want you to have everything that you should have. This is how he's telling it to the woman. And we see that that's not true. The reason isn't because of jealousy, it's because of death. So he's spun it in a way to make it seem as though what he's offering them should have been theirs in the first place. So now there's an entitlement, in a sense, to these things. That's how it was presented to her, as you should be outraged because this belongs to you. You should have this. How dare God withhold it from you? Let me come and be the one that helps you to gain access to what he's trying to withhold from you. The human being was not meant to be unrestrained. Like in marriage, one must close themselves off to others in order to be open to one. If they are fully open, meaning having no restrictions with the opposite sex, they have exposed themselves to attacks on the marriage, as they have made themselves open to persuasion and seduction. Their foolishness, which is having no boundaries, will cost them everything. God placed restrictions on the human's knowledge, as he did on the angels when he created him. He was not made to know evil because evil kills its host. Man is not meant to be as Elohim. He's not meant to be his own leader. If he should be his own leader, he should be able to create himself and lead himself. But because he did not create himself, a creator created him, he has a leader. The serpent was offering to remove the restraints, which are the boundaries that were placed on them by Yahovah, but he's not telling them the consequences of doing so, and that it actually is death. He's lied and said that there are no consequences. There are only benefits. You'll be powerful and mighty and knowledgeable to the point where you won't need a leader.
Once she found out that there was more, she desired more. She coveted. This is what the Bible calls coveting and lusting, desiring that which does not belong to you. And this was used against her and became her undoing. It became her downfall. Just as we see Adam's weakness, which is the woman, will be used against him and become his downfall. In Genesis 3:6, we read in the English, "So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave to her husband with her, and he ate." The first word we're going to look at is translated in the English as pleasant. It is ava in the Hebrew, and it means to yearn, to crave, to have a strong desire for, to long for, to covet, and to aspire. It is also a mark, a target, an objective, a goal, a purpose, and an object of pursuit. The next word we're looking at is translated in the English as desirable. It is chamad in the Hebrew, and it means to yearn, to crave, to have a strong desire for, to long for, to covet, to aspire. It also is a mark, a target, an objective, a goal, a purpose, and an object of pursuit. Now, you may have recognized that chamad and ava, though they are different words, mean the same thing. The next word we're looking at is translated as wise in English. It is sachal in the Hebrew, and it means insight, the capacity to gain an accurate and deep intuitive understanding of a thing. It means to be aware, to discern, to understand, to comprehend, to be cognizant, and to be conscious. It also means instruction, to cause to prosper, to succeed, to complete, to perfect, to be bereaved of, which is to deprive, rob, strip, and make desolate, especially by death. It is to lose. It is to be foolish. The next word we're looking at is translated in the English as took. It is lakach, and it is to accept what is given, to gain possession by seizing. It is also a lesson, a teaching. It is knowledge, and it also means to conquer. The next word we're looking at is translated in the English as fruit. It is pri in the Hebrew, and this means to reproduce. It is to bear fruit. The next word we're looking at is ate, which is achal in the Hebrew, and it is to consume, to absorb, to ingest, and to take in. The next word we're looking at is translated in the English as gave. It is natan in the Hebrew, and it means to present a gift, to grant, to bestow. It also means to set, to prepare, and to lay. It also means to deliver up and to permit, which is to give authorization or consent to someone to do something. The last word we're looking at is translated in the English as with. It is im in the Hebrew, and it means to be accompanied by another person or thing. It means to be at one's side. When we retranslate this verse with the Hebrew understanding, what we see is the woman was convinced that the counsel was consumable in order to function within her intended purpose, that it was an object of desire for knowledge she didn't have, and counsel to aspire to in order to make one fully aware. She accepted the reproduction of disobedience, and she took it into her being. She also lay a trap for her man who was by her side, granting the serpent's request to hand him over by instructing him to follow her example and agreeing that the serpent's words are true. And he took it into his being. we see that the mind is the battleground, as our actions are a result of our thoughts. The serpent knows all he has to do is change the way that the woman sees the tree in order to have her cast aside what God had told her. How can this tree be good when God explicitly stated that it was bad, that it was evil? We see that the woman's mind is no longer in reality. She is no longer thinking clearly. She was willing to risk the possible consequences for the possible reward. The woman chose to place her desire for more above her God. And we see that she was truly scammed as she was trading for what she already had. She had wisdom, she had knowledge, she had all of the good and none of the bad. She is now convinced that God was lying to her and the man as to why they shouldn't consume the fruit of this tree. By the serpent's manipulation, and manipulation is to alter or present information so as to mislead. The woman's mind has now been manipulated. She has become a tool in order to carry out what it is that the serpent wants. She set the man up to be delivered, and he willingly took the bait. One can only be manipulated if they have opened themselves up to lies by turning their back on the truth. The man was willing to follow his woman to death. Think Romeo and Juliet. If you drink the poison, I drink the poison. When a woman is disobedient to the word of God, the man is supposed to correct her, as Job did with his woman, or put her away as she is blemished, as Joseph was prepared to do with Mary. He is not under any circumstances to obey the word of his woman over the word of God by following her into disobedience. The man and the woman are no longer prudently walking in obedience. They have willfully committed an offense against God by transgressing his boundaries and are now guilty of disobedience. They have severed themselves from their Creator, which is their source of life. The man and the woman have now joined themselves in rebellion to Yahovah with his enemy. They have now joined the serpent's fight against Yahovah. In this verse, we see John 10:10 come alive, that the thief comes only to steal, to kill, and to destroy. They lost life and gained death. In Genesis 3:7, we read in the English, "Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves coverings." The first word we're going to look at is translated in the English as eyes. It is ayin in the Hebrew, and it means to have sight, discernment, to have understanding, and to have knowledge. The next word we're looking at is translated in the English as opened. It is pakach in the Hebrew, and it means to be wide open, to be open to its full extent, having virtually no limits or restrictions, to be unrestrained, exposed to attack, and to be vulnerable. It also means to be foolish, lawless, disobedient, and to be open to persuasion and seduction. The next word we're looking at is translated in the English as new. It is yada in the Hebrew, and it means to be acquainted, to be skillful, to have an intimate and personal understanding. The next word we're looking at is translated in the English as naked. It is aram, and it is to be cautious, to be prudent, to be shrewd, to be astute, to be sharp, perceptive, and intelligent. The next word we're looking at is translated in the English as sewed together. It is tafar in the Hebrew, and it means to join, to fasten, to mend, to repair, and to patch. The next word we're looking at is translated in the English as made. It is asa in the Hebrew, and it means to cause a particular result or situation to happen or come into existence. The next word we're looking at is translated in the English as covering. It is hagar in the Hebrew, and it means to restrain, to bind, to gird, which is to encircle. It also means to prepare oneself for something difficult or challenging. When we retranslate this verse with the Hebrew understanding, what we see is the knowledge of both of them were unrestrained, and their consciousness was awakened to all things. Now fully aware of their surroundings, they attempted to repair the situation they caused to happen by restraining the flesh with disobedience. We see in this verse that prior to partaking of the accursed thing, they were like children. They were obedient and undefiled. Their consciousness had not been awakened to disobedience. When Yeshua says that the kingdom of God belongs to such as these, and he referred to the children, this is what he means. It's referring to the innocence of children, meaning that Adam and Eve were innocent before they consumed the fruit of the tree of disobedience. We also see that the serpent lied. We see that they now see and understand that the grass isn't greener on the other side, that all that glitters isn't gold. To be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it. And in this instance, they received more than they had bargained for. They caused this situation to happen for themselves by disobedience. And then we see that in order to repair the damage they caused, they attempted to use the very thing that caused the damage in the first place. They attempted to take the leaves in order to make themselves coverings. What this is telling us is that disobedience cannot be restrained. It cannot be bound with disobedience. So they went into their understanding as they are now. And in this new understanding, they attempted to fix the problem. This is why the Bible says, do not rely on your own understanding, because our understanding has now been tainted. It is no longer pure as the Creator made it to be. It has now been infiltrated and it has now been corrupted. So we cannot rely on our own understanding to fix a situation, because disobedience got us into the situation, and the only way to restrain the flesh is with obedience. So we must look to God. We must look to his boundaries. We must look to his instructions in order to restrain disobedience. As we do every week, here are your connections. Genesis 3:1, Genesis 3:3, Genesis 3:5, Genesis 3:6, and Genesis 3:7. I'd like to close in prayer. Yehovah bless you and guard you. Yehovah make his face shine upon you and grant you favor. Yehovah lift up his face toward you and grant you restitution. Place my name upon the children of Israel, and I will bless them. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at Hebrew Insights, or click the subscription button in order to receive notifications regarding next week's video. Until then, Yehovah bless you and guard you.